Hey everyone, welcome back to the Stay on Your Bike podcast. Hope you enjoyed last week's episode. I thought it was really interesting. And this week, I've got a guest on that was pretty influential to me in my early years of BMX racing, for what we'll talk about a bit later. He was a great BMX racer as a kid, and he's always been involved in the sport of cycling, whether it's BMX, mountain biking, right up and to current times. So I'd like to introduce a good friend of mine and a legend of mountain biking and BMX, Clive Gosling. How are you doing, Clive?
I'm doing very well. A little bit embarrassed by the intro, but I'll take it. Listen, at my age, I'll take whatever I can get. Right? All good.
Got to take all the compliments these days, Clive. As you know, we don't get many.
No, no, but it's a pleasure to be on. Thanks for inviting me on. I've really enjoyed listening to the podcast since you've got it going. I do think you need to tweak your intro a little bit. The When you talk about like recently being made redundant, like that is when I listen to that, I feel like, oh no, poor Paigey, right? But I got made redundant just over a year ago, and it was one of the best things that ever happened to me. And sometimes when these things happen in life, you don't realize that it's like part of a bigger plan it's meant to be.
Yeah.
So I know it feels, like when it happened to me, I was like, shit, how am I going to pay the mortgage? How am I going to go and tell the wife I've got no job? But I'm a great believer in serendipity. I'm a great believer in everything happens for a reason. So yeah, I'm looking forward to big things that are coming your way. If I had a bit of budget, I'd get you on board doing helping us out. So hey, you never know.
Well, yeah, if that budget comes around, Clive, I'd always be keen, and I agree. It's a little bit worrying at the time, but you've just got to keep moving forward and see what comes up, and hopefully some new and exciting things will come along.
They absolutely will. I've like you, I've been in the bike industry my whole life. I've only ever worked in the bike industry. I left school. My birthday's in July, so I was always like the youngest in my year. Like July 21st is my birthday. So I normally was turning on my birthday, the day that everybody was leaving the school year. So I was actually 15 when I left school. I turned 16 the week after, and I went straight to work in like the family bike shop. And I've only ever worked in the bike industry since, except for a 6 month period.
Hmm.
And in that time, I've seen a lot of stuff go up and down in the bike industry, right? But I've never seen it like it is now. We can get into the bike industry a bit more, but you know, uh, most of the people I know, close friends, everybody's like lost their jobs, changing jobs, moving jobs, because it's there's a lot of turmoil going down out there. So we can touch on that when we talk about the industry. But keep your chin up, mate, because good things are coming. I feel it.
Yeah, thank you. Appreciate the positive words there, and I'll keep moving forward and see how we go. But obviously, you recently just took on the role as is it Global GT Marketing Manager? Is that your role, or what's your role nowadays?
That yeah, that is my role. Yeah, I'm head of marketing at GT globally. I'm based out of the UK, but spent quite a bit of time this year in America. And yeah, I do have to like pinch myself when I tell people that, or I have a little giggle to myself when I say that, or like when people ask for my email address and I say it's, me at gtbicycles.com. I still, 12-year-old me with my first GT BMX would kind of, not believe like where I'm at today relative to that kind of journey with the brand. So
Yeah.
yeah, it's pretty trippy, but also it comes, it's that old Spider-Man thing, right? With great power comes great responsibility,
Mhm.
and it's also pretty tough, like especially now where the industry is in such tough times and everybody knows that market and budgets are, constrained to be to be like the custodian of such an iconic brand, or one of the custodians. Obviously, it's not just me. There's a whole management team at GT. To be one of the people steering the ship and one of the people responsible for the decisions that are being made at such a iconic brand is also some days quite intimidating. Like I get up and I'll be like, oh my God, I've got to do that today. And that's such a big thing that's going to make such a big difference to the trajectory or the future of the brand that the decisions are pretty big. So sometimes I'm like, oh, please let me get it right.
Yeah.
If I
No,
mess this up, it's Gary Turner will forever scorn me.
yeah, no, definitely, and especially, I think when you're as passionate about bikes and racing and whatever else, like we've always been, you do want to do a good job and you want to get it right and not mess up because there's a lot of fallback on those decisions that you're making, that goes in tons of different directions all over the world for a brand.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't think many people get out of bed in the morning and think, well, I want to go and do a shit job. But I think a lot of people are happy getting out of bed in the morning and plodding along. And I think that in a job like mine and many, yours and many other people, like you can't plod along doing this stuff. You have to really push it and really drive it. And actually, I'd probably like this year working for GT with the couple of weeks that I've taken off, week earlier on in the year, snowboarding with the family, and then a week in the summer having a little holiday. I've worked more events and weekends than I've taken off. Like we're nearly in November, and actually I've got my full holiday entitlement still to kind of try and take this year because I've worked so much, and
Yeah.
because I work for GT being based in California, and I've got four people on my team, and they're based in California, Utah, and Vermont. So
Mhm.
they come online at different times of the day, but generally I am, my day kind of starts properly at probably 3 or 4 p.m. UK time because that's when like Utah, California, Vermont they come online.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's a very different working day, and quite often, like last night, I was on a call with Win and Jason, who's our MD, and we finished at 9 p.m. But that's just part of it. However, it's also still really exciting. Like I don't think, oh shit, I've got a call tonight at 8 p.m.
Yeah.
I think, wow, I've got a really important call this morning tonight, and it's just part of the process. So
Yeah. Yeah,
yeah,
it's a different way of running a job, isn't it? When I was running the team, there was plenty of times where I could go out for a bike ride in the off season or whatever. But like you say, I might be doing something in the evening, talking to someone from a different part of the world, and yeah, it's just a kind of 24/7 sort of 365-day a year job. It's
yeah.
but if you're into it and you're excited about it, that doesn't matter, does it?
Yeah, there's that old saying, if you love what you do, you never really work a day in your life. I get the sentiment. I mean, it feels like work, especially like when we're in the US and we're doing events, we're kind of going back to what I was doing in my 20s, with Cannondale, going to an event, setting up the tents, getting the bikes out, setting everything up, giving people demo rides, talking to people. So all that stuff, doing it again this year, and I haven't sort of done it for a while, feels really good actually reconnecting with everybody, going to those events and bringing the brand along. GT is a brand in North America where we've been doing this big tour this year, the Fast Lines and Good Times tour. GT hasn't kind of been on the road for years. So we, got the trailer and the van all wrapped up with the new look and feel of the brand, and we went and did all the big bike festivals, and we went to visit a lot of dealers, and we can look and see that when we went to visit a dealer, and bearing in mind me and Steve Spencer in the US, who was mainly doing the tour, and Benny, our digital marketing guy, when we would go to a store after that visit, you could see that sales in that store really picked up.
Yeah.
Like they were either doing not a lot and all of a sudden did something, or they did quite a bit and then did a lot. So
Yeah.
just going and visiting dealers, not even as salespeople, just going and telling them what was happening with the brand, and showing them products that maybe they hadn't seen, and telling them why we were in town or why we were passing because we were going to these big events. That really resonated well with dealers in the US. And actually, you know, a lot of them said that they hadn't seen anybody from any bike brand since COVID. Like after COVID, when everything went virtual,
Yeah.
like they just had people just don't walk in the shops anymore, reps or people that work for the companies. They're
Yeah.
just not out there like getting in front of the dealers.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, like, we could harp on about the difficulty of the industry again, like I've done on, lots of different interviews with people, but obviously, you rode for GT back in the day on BMX, and GT's, for people of our age is a super iconic brand. GT was huge in BMX racing in the 80s and, right through. And then, when I got into mountain biking in the sort of mid 90s, the first proper bike I bought was a GT because, it was an iconic brand. And then my first suspension bike was a GT. And then obviously then moving forward, started racing the being interested in the downhill World Cups. And, you had people like Nicholas Vulio and Mike King, Steve Peat, all these super high profile riders that rode for GT and won all those, titles. And the brand was, super cool and in the forefront of, people's minds to buy those GT bikes. And then, once the GT program got into um, trouble when I don't know, early 2000s, I guess it was when the team went under, and then the brand has not gone away, but it's kind of changed, and the industry moves on quickly, and more people, new people get into the sport, whether it's kids or adults coming into mountain biking because it's growing all the time. And you've got to keep, it doesn't matter how much heritage you've got with your bike brand. I think, you have to keep it relevant, like you say, like going out to do demo days, dealer showings, ride outs, race teams, all that is what builds your brand to then people want that brand. And in every single area in the country or the world, you need to have representatives on that brand to, make that brand relevant to the people in that area to think, oh, that's a nice bike. But if they're not seeing them
Mm.
on the ground, they're not interested in it. This-
Yeah, yeah. As you touched on, the bike industry, has been in meltdown for a few years, and I think a lot of people thought that 2024 was going to be a big clear out year, and that 2025 would be back to some sort of normality, whatever the new normal is going to be for the bike industry, because we don't know what that's going to look like, right? If you look around, a lot of brands have closed offices and centralized everything, cut costs. So when the bike industry does kind of come out the other side, I don't, I probably don't see it going back to how it was. It will be a different industry. But in this time of turmoil, we are strategically repositioning and fundamentally changing GT from where it was to where we want it to be. So actually, a lot of that is kind of happening under the radar because this bike industry is so messy anyway. A lot of people are not really laser focused on what we're doing. Whereas if it was a normal market, what we're doing might be a bit more noticeable. But we're basically a couple of years, 2019, all of the Durrell sports brands, so that was GT, Cannondale, Schwinn, Mongoose, Caloi, they got bought by a Dutch company called Pon.
Yep.
And Pon, who are our current owners, they're a really interesting company. They were like after World War II, Ben Pon, who's the grandfather of the people that run it currently, is a private company. He went to Germany and went to VW and said that he wanted to buy VW Beetles and ship them on trains into the Netherlands. And Pon actually was the first ever VW distributor outside of Germany. And they still distribute VW products in the Netherlands today and other parts of the world. So it's a super interesting business. But they bought the Durrell sports brands and brought them into their existing bike portfolio, which is Santa Cruz, Cervelo, One Up Components. So they were already Gazella, which is obviously one of the biggest bike brands in Europe. So they had this existing bike portfolio. They bought our portfolio in, which really makes Pon one of, if not the biggest bike companies in the world, collection of bike companies. And then obviously we had the crazy COVID spike, and then obviously the massive post-COVID crash. So so luckily for us, Pon have got a lot of other businesses, so that when the bike industry isn't doing so good, it's okay because they've got other diversified interests. But when we were bought by Pon, it took Pon a little while to figure out like where they wanted to position the brands and so on. And as I'm sure you know, and a lot of people in the bike industry know, GT and Cannondale were kind of sister companies for at least kind of 10 to 15 years. And GT was based out of the same offices in Connecticut. So when they bought it, GT ended up in a category called Pond Performance. So we were actually put with Santa Cruz, Cervelo, One Up, and that was mainly because Joe Graney, who I'm sure you know, who was heading up Santa Cruz at the time, he had a GT as a kid, had a soft spot for the brand, and wanted it, and basically wanted it in his sort of part of the business. And then he recruited Jason Shears, who is the managing director of GT, to run the brand. Jason was the founder of Envy Composites, so he's got a incredible history in the bike game. So Jason came in to run it with Joe under Joe's guidance, sat in this new part of the business alongside these other brands. And the first thing that Jason did was he went out to Connecticut where the brand was, and he kind of got the size of it. And the first decision that he made, significant decision, was moving the company back to California. So he separated it out from the business that it had been in for 10, 15 years with Cannondale, and took it back to California, set up our own little space in one of the Pond offices, which is actually a shared office with Cervelo. And basically for the last couple of years, like trying to get through all this mess of inventory and everything else, but also just steering the brand in the direction that he wanted it to be. So GT, even though it's always had like the Athertons and winning the downhill stuff, I know what you mean about that break. There was, you know, I mean, GT, like many brands in the bike industry, had that like early 2000 financial troubles, and then they had a break, and then came back with a bang with the Athertons and had a real strong like 5 year streak of winning World Cups and so on. So yeah, it's been a bit of a ride, and it still continues to be a bit of a ride. But bottom line is that we're sort of our new goal is that when you go out to buy a new bike, you'll be looking at two or three bikes that you're all hot for, and one of them would be the GT.
So what is, obviously the heritage of GT was BMX and then mountain bike. Um, in current times, what's the sort of not percentage, but how much time and effort is put into the BMX over a gravel bike, over a mountain bike, trail bike, over a downhill bike, over an e-bike? How is all that managed? And which bikes do think do you aim for the ones that you feel like are going to sell the most of in the future, or how does all that process go?
To answer that question specifically, no, we don't. And the reason I say that is because GT for the last 10 years has done very well making, halfway decent hardtails at, five or $600, and then being sold in America through places like Dick's Sporting Goods, which is, not a specialist bike shop, but a very good, sports store, right? And for us to sort of get the brand where we want it to be, I guess in the UK that would be the equivalent of maybe Halfords, but I know Halfords isn't sort of a sporting place, but it's having the bikes in Dick's in the US to US IBDs and US high-end consumers was a little bit like having the brand in Halfords in the UK. So it's not it that product at that price really fits well there,
Yeah.
but it affects what you can do elsewhere. So, independent bike dealers might not want to stock it if it's in those other chains. And our goal is to make, amazing bikes that are sold through amazing bike shops that people have an amazing ride experience on. So we did have to make some difficult decisions, and we actually pulled out of, lots and lots of profitable business to sort of change this trajectory. But we also took the decision to get out of products and markets that weren't the future for the brand. So a couple of years ago, we would have had a big range of hybrid bikes, for commuters and whatnot.
Yeah.
We're not continuing with those. We will have a bit of a cool pub bike, but in terms of an urban offering, we're not an urban brand. GT is a dirt brand. We were born in the dirt in 1972. Gary Turner built the first BMX for his son Craig, and that's really where we shine, in the dirt. So mountain bike, BMX, BMX freestyle, which arguably isn't in the dirt, but it's still that radical side of the sport. Yeah, and gravel. So that's going to be our focus.
Oh, cool, cool. And then obviously, along with with good bikes and a good brand, you need good ambassadors on your products. And obviously, you mentioned Win before. I think Win's a great ambassador for the brand, all the stuff he does. You've had the downhill race team this year, with Danny Hart having success on the downhill bike. And then you've got other athletes in other areas. Is there like going to be a budget to focus on certain, you know, um, new potential athletes in different parts of the sport?
That's a great question, and I am still waiting for you to send your CV in as a rider, for consideration. Uh,
A lot of people in the 40s and 50s are probably the customers, aren't they? So yeah, I'm a great ambassador.
Hey, listen, you're talking to the guy that pays Hans Ray's wages, right? So I know all about riders at different ages, and this year, I think Hans has been with GT this year for 37 years. It's like the longest. We were
Brilliant.
trying to we were trying to figure out if there is a longer standing sponsorship between an athlete and a brand, or a rider and a brand. The only one we can think of is maybe Steve Caballero and Vans. That's the only one that we can think might be a longer relationship than Hans Ray's Hans Ray riding for GT. But you're right. You're right. Athletes, ambassadors, they are still really important, especially in the world we live in today with social and everything else. And at GT, I sort of came in and inherited a year ago a pretty heavy rider roster. And with reduced budgets and inheriting a big rider roster, it really sort of limited our ability to take on new teams and athletes. Not to say that the people that we inherited weren't some of the best riders in the world. We got, like you said, Win, Hans, Braga Vestovic, who's, like the free ride, you know, demigod. Um, Tyler McCall, David Lieb. So there's a really strong rider roster on the mountain bike side. And we've got a really long-standing BMX freestyle squad. And then obviously in the UK, I was, supporting Kai White in BMX race at an Olympic level for the last 7 years. So it was a real great mix of riders. And if anything, I would say that maybe GT's athletes and ambassadors, teams and riders were probably more than the brand needed or could afford, but we still knew that it was really important to have this kind of global wrecking crew with riders that help different markets. So say for example, Braga up in Norway, up in the Nordics, there's an event we do up there with the Tresol Bike Park that GT sponsor, and there's the B Rage event, and I was out there maybe 6 weeks ago, and honestly, this thing is nuts.
How did
There's
I follow it on Instagram?
Mate, there's 12. The kid that did that drop. So last year, that big ladder drop, I think it's about a foot wide, and it goes out about 30 feet, and it just drops, I think, like 50 feet. And last year, I think six or eight people did it last year, and I think there was five like crashes or broken bikes. It's that gnarly. So this year they made the landing a little bit less aggressive. And there was only one kid that did it this year, and he was a 16-year-old kid on a entry level 140 mil alloy GT sensor, and the kid just nailed it. So up there's all these young rad kids, and they all basically because of the Braga effect and the bike park effect, they're all riding GTs and they all love GTs. So it's really important that we have these like regional ambassadors. So
And
Braga's awesome. What Win has done this year with Win TV and the Privateer project has been unbelievable. I've been lucky enough to go to a few World Cups and sort of help and hang out. And honestly, like I would say that Win is the hardest working guy in the bike industry. He just does not stop. Like especially when there's a World Cup weekend, he is like on it all the time, like maximum effort. So we're really lucky that we have riders and athletes and ambassadors like Win and Braga and T-Mac, all these guys. T-Mac's been with GT now for 16, 17 years. And then obviously this year we didn't have the budget to really support additional teams and athletes, but Danny contacted us late last year and we were talking to Danny's team about helping them out. And then and then it kind of went quiet because they like Mark Cumming that runs that team. He was kind of assured that the Nuke Proof were still going to support the team, and everybody knows that Danny was riding a Nuke Proof in the off season last year. And then obviously earlier this year the wheels came off with chain reaction, as you know, mate, because you were part of the fallout, right? So we had a sort of last minute, I think it was, I don't know, might have been even as late as February where did it happen in February this year? I'm just trying to think when it happened.
the final nail in the coffin was February, yeah.
Yeah, so at that point, Mark and Danny contacted us and said, look, the nuke proof deal had fallen through. And we had actually already committed to supporting an Italian team called Rogue Racing, because we needed to have a team at World Cup level so that Win could have a base for Privateer project.
Sure.
So we basically supported this team. It's run by a guy called Leo. He runs an unbelievably tight team, on a really good, really small budget, and he's got some great riders like Davide Palazzari, who's an Italian national champion. And so we supported him and plugged Win in. And then Mark and Danny came back and said, "Look, we'd love to do something with you." And I was like, "Dudes, we just haven't like the ship has sailed. We're now supporting this team
Yeah.
with product and some funding. We just don't have the budget to do it in such a tight year when there isn't extra budget. So we ended up sort of agreeing to support them like with product because Mark had other sponsors that were contributing towards the cost of the team.
Yeah.
But it was always, I mean, even supplying a team at that level with product is still, 40, 50 grand product investment, right? Product value. Then Danny needs a custom bike for the Worlds, and that's a 1,500 quid paint job. So it's still cash that
Yeah.
isn't budgeted and it's tough to find. But you don't you don't turn down the opportunity to get on board with a rider of Danny's caliber.
Yeah.
But also Danny was pretty confident that he liked the bike and did well on the bike. And I've actually heard that from a couple of other riders. I heard somebody contacted me recently and about sponsorship for next year, and I said, "Oh, like, am I the last brand you're calling?" Everybody else has said they haven't got any budget. So yeah, this rider said he wanted to ride the GT the way that Ethan got second at Mount St. Anne, and he went off. He basically said he was standing by that Stevie Smith drop, and basically Ethan went off there like better than anybody, and this other rider thought that the bike was actually part of that.
Yeah.
Um, and everybody was sort of citing that Ryan Pinkerton and Ethan had a killer year last year on GTs.
People notice that for sure.
Yeah, so Danny was confident he could do well on it. So despite the fact we didn't really have the budget, I kind of jiggled things around a little bit, and we got on board with them. And yeah, we've had a awesome year working with Mark, who runs the team, and Harry Malloy, Veronica, and Chris Cumming, Dale, who is Danny's mechanic, who obviously from Nuke Proof. It's been really interesting working with them, and Danny missing a world's win, his third world's win by 0.28 seconds. I mean, that was nuts. So that's been really good. I mean, I was talking to Danny this week because we're trying to sort him out with a little bit of a sort of end of year thank you for all the hard work he's done. But that team next year with all the changes with the World Cup teams at the moment, I don't even know if we will be in World Cup racing next year. We're talking to several teams. We know that it's pretty tough for brands. I'd like to keep my foot in it if we can, but if we can't, there's so much other stuff going on. And I think because of the way that Warner Brothers and UCI are going with World Cups, with making it more more elite, I think that you'll see below that the other events becoming more important for brands, more elevated. So, the Monster Series in the US with the US Open, the IXS Series, those urban downhills, man, they are really, really gathering pace and getting some traction. So next year we might be in World Cup racing. We might not, but outside of racing, the whole free ride thing. This year at Rampage, we had uh, Tommy G and Team Rampage. Uh, T Mac got third. Tommy G had one of the sort of coolest stories of Rampage, where you see when he crashed, his bike just disappeared off the
Yeah,
off the cliff,
yeah,
and then it landed and bounced and went down more, and landed and bounced and went down more.
yeah.
And we'd done a special bike for Rampage for Tommy G, and I sent it. He lives in a really remote part of south of France,
Right.
and I sent it to him uh, on like a kind of FedEx overnight to get it there for him. And it took over a week to get there, and he'd already left for Rampage by the time it got there. So we actually did another one in the US because it had a ride wrap on it, and then
Yeah,
we sent it down to Utah and had it all built for him.
yeah.
So he had this super cool bike, but because he hadn't practiced on it, he wanted to stick on his other bike, and
Right.
that's the bike that fell off the cliff. And
Right.
then Jason, our MD, was actually out in Utah,
Yeah,
and they got the bike and inspected it, and Jason said, "Well, it's just fallen 50 foot off a cliff, but I can't actually see any damage. But I would recommend you ride your spare bike just in case." And Tommy G said, "No, I'm used to this one. I want to ride this one." So he did his second run on the same bike. And obviously we had a you know, bit of a butt clench moment because you don't know what's going on inside the frame if it's just falling 50 foot off a cliff, but it was totally fine. So
brilliant.
so to summarize all that, athletes and riders and teams, I think they're super important in validating your product, showcasing your product. Uh, and I think GT will always be connected to some of the best riders. If you look through the history, you've already mentioned it,
Yeah,
Nico, PE, Mike King, all these people. I think the modern day people that we have are, maybe not uh, some of them in racing. Maybe we haven't got a Bruni or a Finn or whatever,
yeah,
but I think the characters that we've got and the success that we've had with Privateer Project with helping bring through like new talent. I mean, if you look at a lot of the riders, like Ronan, he was on the Privateer Project for an event. So I think that program really feels like giving back to the sport and bringing new riders through. And I think maybe that is more important nowadays than winning a World Cup, because back in our day, if Nico would win that, because there was no internet and magazines, you that really had an impact on sales. And also there was far fewer bike brands back then, right? So if Nico went and won a World Cup, people would want to buy, LTS Lobos or LTS DHs or whatever.
yeah.
And nowadays that doesn't really happen. Like a rider can go and win a World Cup, and it doesn't really make a huge difference in sales, but it does give you like a compelling storytelling opportunity. And I think really that's the modern day of marketing that we're in, is that when these riders go and do these great things, you're just making a cool story out of it. And that story builds your brand and resonates with people, makes them feel warm and fluffy about your brand. And then when they're in the market for a bike, they remember they feel good about GT. So
Definitely. I mean, like you just said, depending on what type of riding you do, I think, a good race program sells bikes to people that go racing, but then there's plenty of kids, whether you, I guess back in our day with BMX, there was BMX racers and there was kind of BMX freestylers, which was basically some people went racing, some people just did tricks and rode the bikes locally. Nowadays, especially with social media, there's so much stuff to watch for young people to do. Like you've got, Braga doing his thing, and kids emulate some of that stuff in their local woods and build stuff. So I think it's super hard to quantify especially for as a business, sort of decisions, what sells your bikes more? Does Braga sell more GT bikes for the brand because of all the cool stuff and the huge following he does? Does T-Mac getting a podium at the biggest watched mountain bike event in the world at Rampage, or does Danny Art sell more bikes by, you know, if he'd have won the world championships? Does Win sell more bikes from just being on the ground, more accessible to the public? It's really hard to determine what sells more bikes, doesn't isn't it?
It's well, you know what? If we could figure that out, we probably could start our own marketing agency together, Paige, and we'd probably both be in a really good spot to try. I mean, again, it's that super old saying in marketing, like 50% of your marketing works. It's just trying to figure out which 50%. I think I think that was pre-digital. And now with digital marketing, you can really see what works, right? You can track things so much more. And the reality is that it depends what you're trying to achieve. If you're just trying to sell a bike, then making making some nice content on that bike and then putting it out on Google or Meta, and with a very obvious call to action to get people on your site and see the bike and buy it or whatever. That's probably the most effective thing. But all the other stuff we do is the storytelling that gives you the content to push out, or the storytelling that keeps your current customers and fans engaged. Because marketing serves different purposes, right? Like, obviously we're doing it because we want to draw more people into our brand and buy our products, but you also have a whole, you've got hundreds of thousands of people out there that already own your products and love your brand. And, when they're scrolling through Instagram, they want to see their bike being validated or their athletes that are their favorites. So, marketing has become, especially in this sort of digital age, it's become easier to do some stuff. And like I said, from a tracking perspective and sort of analytics, you can figure stuff out easier. But you still have to go with a bit of gut feel, like, why are we doing this? Does it feel, are we going racing for the right reasons?
Yeah,
And that has pivoted a little bit from going racing to win races to, in recent years, that the privateer project, Win started it off just because he remembered how difficult it was when he first came to Europe, right? And a little bit of help went a long way. So he walked around the pits, raising a bit of money for the privateers, and then all the brands that were involved with Win, GT, Continental, Shimano, they all said, "Wow, this is really good. Actually, we could build on this." So we built it out with Win,
yeah,
and now it's his project entirely,
yeah,
and it feels like you're creating great content, but you're also just doing something really good for the sport. And some of the riders this year, like Win, is unbelievably good at talent spotting. He can really see a good rider. So he, at the beginning of the year, he said to me, "I want to bring this kid in, Luke Wayman from New Zealand. I want to basically help him for the season. So rather than just one event, I want to help him for the season."
yeah,
So, I'd never heard of Luke, and he brought him in. First World Cup at Fort William, he was on the podium. He actually finished the season in junior men downhill in second, ahead of Asa Vermette, obviously the next kid that everybody's talking about. Obviously, I know Asa didn't do all the World Cups and had some crashes, but you know, as you know in racing, consistency, finishing second at the end of the year is better than finishing third or fourth. So you could argue that Luke had a better season than Asa, who is the one that everybody's talking about. But it, racing is you've also got to get to the finish line, and you've also got to be fit and healthy to do all the races.
Yeah.
So Luke's had a great year, and Win has these gut feels that we support with him, and they pay off. So he had Luke. He also had a young junior woman, Ella Svegby from Sweden. She had never raced a mountain bike World Cup until this year, and she won the European Championships. She got a silver medal at Worlds, and on the podium pretty much most of the World Cups that she raced. So yeah, wins awesome. And again, Win took her under his wing instead of just like supporting her for one event. He took her under his wing and supported her for the whole year, and even brought some people in like Wynn's got a very entrepreneurial way of working. Like he doesn't have this set out plan. He very much is reactive to what's happening. So for the first privateer project at Fort William was a Canadian guy called Gabe. And after that World Cup, Gabe said, "Hey, if you need any help at any of the other World Cups, just let me know. I'd love to hang out with you guys a bit more." So Wynn pretty much kept him for the year to help support Luke and Ella. And then when Ella started doing good, but she needed a bit of help, then Gabe brought his girlfriend along, who was like a ski instructor and a very good mountain biker. And basically they were sort of helping with the team, like running around and cooking and taking Ella to the top and making sure she was cool before a run. So it felt like a really cool little privateer project family this year.
Yeah.
It's really, really good. Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. And then obviously, one of the other athletes that you mentioned, Kai White, obviously had an amazing BMX career. Um, and coming second at the Olympics the previous time that he knew, he was so close to winning. But I think like for me, the person and the personality that Kai is, when he'd just come second and narrowly missed out on gold, but then when Beth won, the reaction that Kai did, where he ran over and he picked her up at the finish line, to 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 the outside world, I think that was much bigger than if he'd have won himself. The joy that he shared for his friend and his teammate to win the Olympics was exceptional, and that was on mainstream TV, which obviously led to Kai being a personality where he went on to do Dancing on Ice, and now I follow him on Instagram, and he's sponsored by Ben Sherman and some big outside the industry brands, which is so cool. How do you think that, how much do you think that brings the GT brand into a wider audience than, say, we're used to within the industry?
Um, yeah, great question again. I mean, Kai comes from that, the Peckham BMX program, which is CK's program.
Yeah,
Um, you know, CK we all used to race together back in the 80s, and then he went off and did his DJ thing, and then he got the little track going, then the big track, and then a lot of these superstar riders have come from that Peckham BMX program. I would say that I look at the relationship with Kai and CK and Peckham almost as a single unit. And it's really close to my heart because that Peckham BMX track is half a mile from Edwards, which is my family's bike shop, where
yeah,
I left school and went to work and grew up working. So I'm very sort of close to that community still up there. And I don't know whether you've seen it. If you go on BBC iPlayer and you put BMX in,
Mhm.
CK and the Peckham Club have done like a whole docu-series about the track. It follows all the riders, and that for me is what we kind of need because that gets BMX
Yeah,
in front of not a non-BMX audience, it gets it in front of a non-cycling audience. So what you're saying, Kai, when he went on Dancing on Ice and he went out for his first one, he took his bike out on the ice because I met him at Streatham and I fitted the Schwalbe studded tires on the bike for him. So it was great that he got BMX in front of a non-cycling audience. And the reason that that is so important is we're at a pretty delicate time, I think, because there's kids that can't ride a bike. And there are adults that can't ride a bike, and there are also kids that can't swim. So for the first time, probably ever,
Mm.
kids are not learning to ride a bike or swim as a sort of life skill.
Yeah,
So our parents probably taught us to ride bikes and to, send us into swimming lessons
yeah,
because they're life skills.
yeah.
And a lot of kids now don't leave their bedroom or they don't have those kind of interests. So I think to get BMX in front of non-cycling audiences to make them see how great cycling is and how inspirational cycling is really important. Because if we don't get kids on bikes now, we don't have a bike industry for the future.
No, no. And how obviously times have moved on. We've just got obviously, where I live now. I live right in the heart of a mountain bike town in Leithen in the Tweed Valley. People come from all over the country and especially the north of England and everywhere in Scotland to ride here. At weekends it's chocker. They've the local lads that build the trails up here have just reopened a track this week that's an older track. They've been working on it for like a year with no machines. They just, shovels. That opened this week, and there's been so many people coming this week to ride that trail. But it still doesn't, get um, families and kids, young kids that are interested in bikes as such, because the mountain bikes that you need to ride the trails here are expensive bikes. However, we've just got that's the great thing about BMX. It's not too expensive to buy a bike and get into it, but obviously nowadays there's more pump tracks being built than we had BMX tracks when we were kids, in quite a lot of the nearest towns, which is how I got into it and how you got into it. But we've just had a new pump track built, which you can kind of ride any bike on a pump track. Obviously a big suspension mountain bike isn't much fun, but a little hardtail, or a BMX bike is great for getting into the sport. Um, do you think do you think that will continue growing? Do you think every town will end up with a pump track or something similar that will, get the kids more involved on bikes, and then once they've started riding bikes, they'll go off in the different directions that bike riding, hopefully gives them opportunities for?
I hope so, and you're absolutely right. Like, you're spoiled with. I mean, you choose to live there, but you're spoiled with the trails up there. The riding is magnificent, but down here in Dorset, the riding's not the same. But the BMX tracks and the pump tracks, absolutely, especially with the pump track being normally in a town, sort of like in the middle of the community, visible and so on. I think that's really important with getting kids on bikes. And you're right, you can go around a pump track on a balance bike at 2 or 3 years of age, or you can cruise around it, like us older guys in our 50s, thinking, reliving the glory days. So and BMX racing, you hit the nail on the head because it's so accessible and probably non-intimidating. I mean, to go to Bike Park Wales or to come up to Innerleithen as a non-hardcore mountain biker is pretty intimidating. But to go to a local BMX track and to try it out, it's pretty simple. You can roll over stuff. You can build your speed up. I think that they are pump tracks and BMX tracks and BMX as a scene and jump bikes as a scene. They're the gateway drugs to more mountain bikers in the future.
Yeah.
And also not just mountain bikers. Maybe they'll go on to ride gravel bikes or road bikes. As long as they're riding bikes and they're healthy, I think that's all we could hope for, right?
Yeah. for sure, definitely. Well, let's take it back a bit now, Clive, to how you got into it, which I'm super familiar with. You've mentioned that your family had a bike shop, and I know your mum's always been heavily involved in the BMX racing. And
Sorry. When you talk about my mum, could you address her correctly? Two times Hall of Fame inductee, Carol
sorry,
Gosling. If you
sorry,
could just,
Carol.
I'm sure you saw last weekend she was inducted into the British Cycling Hall of Fame, and she was on stage with, Laura Kenny and Joanna Rousel and all Tracy Mosley, all these sort of icons of the sport. And there's my little mum up there for her services to BMX. It was pretty trippy for me and her, but
Yeah,
yeah,
and
I'm
well
mega
deserved,
proud.
Carol. Let's give Carol a clap. Well deserved. Put many, many years into getting that title.
Yeah. So how did I get into it? Well, I I I don't think I was particularly cool as a kid. I had big like NHS glasses and I wasn't cool enough to skateboard. I had roller skates and did a bit of ice skating. And then when BMX came along, so my family, you're right, my family had a bike shop. It was started by my great grandfather in 1908.
Wow.
And it's still running today, and it's still my mum's maiden name was Edwards, so it's called Edwards of Camberwell up in London. It's still run by my uncle. My mum still works there a day a week as well. And I left school and went to work in the bike shop. But before that, on my 11th birthday, I think it was, BMX had just come out, and we had some BMXs in the shop, and my mum took me into the shop, and my granddad was running the shop at the time. And my mum said, "Oh, it's Clive's birthday," and my granddad said, "Oh, he can have any bike in the shop if it's his birthday." And my mum said, "Well, he actually wants one of those new BMX bikes." And my granddad looked at my mum and said, "Well, if he wants one of those toys, you're going to have to pay for it." So when BMX came out, like because the bike market was fairly traditional and they were pretty radical looking and so on, I'm not sure how they were initially viewed by sort of like the real bike industry. And also my dad was a roadie, and he always said, when you're going to get a real bike like your dad, that kind of stuff.
What year would that have been?
That would have been 81.
81.
Yeah, 80, 80, 81, 80, 81.
Okay, and so yeah, that was, probably a similar time when I first saw a BMX bike. But what, what was the first thing that introduced you into a BMX bike and you wanting a BMX bike? Was it because you saw it in that shop, or did somebody else have one that you kind of looked up to?
No, a few kids where I lived got them at a similar time, but the first time I really saw them was in the shop. And obviously, because my family was in the bike industry, you hear about, oh, there's this new thing, right? And BMX was relatively new, so I think we were pretty early at getting into BMX, and I was certainly not uh, as early as some of the UK riders that were sort of late 80s when it really first came. Sorry, late 70s when it really first came. But yeah, I would say I got in pretty early. And I think also your UK BMX original license number kind of indicates a little bit how early you were into it. And yeah, got that first bike, and went, rode it to up the woods and rode it up the little skate park, and
I
it was
think we might need
just
to edit that out, Clive, because people will be looking back now on old photos, your bank account.
That's fine. They still got to get my bank card and put it in an ATM. I'm not worried about it. But yeah, edit it out. You're quite right. The So yeah, getting that first BMX, and also, like, we also mustn't forget that a bike is, the first way that you explore outside of your initial neighborhood, right? I remember, you live in an area and you go to school there and you might sort of go a bit here and there, but when you've got a bike and somebody says there's this amazing jump in these woods and it's about 5 miles away, and
Yeah,
you're like, wow, okay, let's go. And you're traveling outside of your comfort zone.
yeah.
So I remember BMX also being first real taste of exploration and freedom and like travel outside of your comfort zone, which I thought was really good. And then because of the shop, there was a guy called David Wiltshire who was a rep for Mongoose. And he came into the shop and said to my mum, "Oh, there's this BMX track down at Buckmore, and we have races down there, and you should bring Clive down and let him do a race." And my mum said, "Well, like, what does he need?" And he said, "Oh, he needs a bike and long trousers and a helmet." And my mum said, "Well, he hasn't even got a helmet." And he said, "Well, just come down. We've got a spare helmet. He can borrow it." So me and my mum drove to Buckmore Park, which is probably like an hour away. That was the nearest track then. And I think this is probably late 81, maybe early 82. Colin Sharp from OT Cycles used to do the gate, and I think they just migrated from having an elastic band gate to like a proper wooden gate with a handle. So it's real early days. And yeah, did my first, borrowed a helmet, did my first BMX race. Um, and that was it. Once you've done your first BMX race, you're hooked, right?
Yeah.
So that was early 80s, and I raced BMX until the mid 90s. So I think
Well,
the last races I did were, well, last World Championships I did, I think it was about 95 in Michigan. Probably did a little bit of racing 96, 97, 98, but really tapering off then because mountain bike racing had sort of come along, and we sort of migrated over, me and my friendship group kind of migrated over to mountain biking, only because BMX racing at that stage had really fallen off a cliff. There wasn't many riders that used to get the races, the tracks weren't great, and it just sort of like seemed like we'd done it for a long time and we wanted to do something new.
yeah, sure. But you mentioned you started off and you weren't in your own mind you weren't a cool kid, but then you got into BMXing, and BMXing at the time in the 80s it was a cool thing to do, wasn't it? The reason you did it, it wasn't to be cool, it was just it was super fun and everyone sort of was doing it, but it was pretty cool. um, and we talk about people that are influential in the great athletes we've just mentioned, and yourself and me. We raced for a long time, you a lot longer than me, and you had some great success in BMX racing. But you can talk about in the different disciplines. You've got in our country, our first heroes were like Tim March and Andy Ruffle and Geth Shooter and people like that. And then obviously later on there was, Anthony, younger kids, more my age, Anthony Howells, Dale, Dylan, um, Damien Miles. There's all super, super cool riders from all over the country that were influential to the younger kids. I was never sponsored. I've listened to your interviews in the past, and to me you looked like a factory rider because you had all the cool stuff that you got through your shop. And I've always been influenced in a bike brand or a certain bike, not not necessarily because somebody's world champion on it or somebody's a winner on it. Just for me, I was always interested in a bike if I thought it looked cool. And when I first started, it was a Robinson because of Alan's BMX shop being near my house, and they had a super cool team. Tony Holland looked amazing on his bike. His bike looked amazing. Um, my hero growing in the early days was Tim March and then Geth Shooter. But I never wanted a bike that Geth Shooter rode or Tim March rode. But I wanted a bike that you rode because when I first saw your 09 and your 09 kit, instantly I wanted that bike. And then I'd say I didn't really want another bike until right at the end of my BMX racing, when I think I was in Belgium for the whatever that BMX Worlds was in Belgium, and
Fiat Worlds.
yeah, and I just actually started getting a bit faster then because I'd grown. I was always small, and I nearly made the final at that race, but I crashed in one of my semis. But anyway, the next bike that I wanted was when you turned up on an S&M bike, and I think you had a Vision Streetwear sticker on your chain ring, and I thought that's a cool bike. So, to me, the bikes that you had and rode was super influential. You were a good bike rider, and I looked up to you as being a good bike rider. I always remember you were really good at speed jumping, and I really liked speed jumping. Um, and I remember Dean Idials, who was insane on a bike. I remember him borrowing your 09, I believe, and won a national on it. I'm not sure what the circumstances were. But you influenced me with the bikes you had. And so, you know, um, and probably a lot of other people. But how did you come about getting those really cool brands that were a little bit different to, say, your mainstream brands at the time, which, like GT and Mongoose and brands like that?
Yeah. Well, thank you for the very kind words. And if I did influence you in any way, I'm very honoured and privileged to hear that. I think because of the shop and sort of having early access to new stuff and maybe seeing stuff before anybody else, I think that's probably what did it. But I think you're right. You know, BMX probably did make us cool, right? So, like I said, I wasn't a cool kid of the 70s. When everybody had a skateboard, like I said, I had roller skates, and I didn't feel like I was particularly cool. But yeah, definitely once you start racing BMX, and we I raced BMX for years and was just mediocre at best. But it's one of those sports where you do it just because you love doing it, but also it's what you and your friends do. So you'd go to a race and it'd be this mega social thing. And racing was just part of it. And if you did good, it was a bonus. If you didn't do good, you still had one of the best weekends of your life, right? Because you're hanging out with your friends and you're jumping on the track and you're so excited seeing everything. So that for me was the motivation. And then because of the bike shop, I would go to trade shows or, interact with distributors like Hot Wheels. I mean, I had a Robinson from Allen's, similar sort of time as you. So that was one of my first aspirational bikes, I guess. In fact, that was probably the Robinson after the Team Murray, like which was my first bike. The bikes I had after that, a Diamondback, a Redline, I didn't really choose those. They were like Christmas or birthday presents, and that was what my mum heard was like the latest bike to have. Like, oh, Diamondbacks are really cool, so get your Diamondback.
Yeah.
And then the first bike that I probably chose for myself, I went to my mum and said, "Oh, I really want that bike," was a Robinson. And they were super cool, and Alan's ran a super cool program. And I've still got an unbelievable admiration for Alan Woods today with everything that he's done in the sport and everything he still does for the sport,
Yeah.
especially considering his, health journey for the last couple of years. So, big up Alan and Alan's BMX for their contribution to the sport. And then after that, I had a GHP. So my first hero actually was Greg Hill. Even though Andy Ruffle and Tim March were phenomenal riders, the impressions from the US riders hit me a lot more. I love that super factory look.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure that Andy or Tim ever really had the same kind of factory look. Andy didn't. I mean, don't get me wrong, Andy Ruffle is one of the best BMX riders of all time, but he always had a wonky visor or a bad fitting helmet. Like he was never, I wouldn't say that Andy ever looked super factory, maybe in the early Mongoose days with the Bell full face, but definitely on rally he didn't look factory. And Tim looked factory in the early days when he was on GT, and then the MRD thing was pretty cool, but nothing looked as cool as a gate of 8 US pros with Harry Leary on Diamondback and Greg Hill on
Yeah.
GT or GHP, and that really impacted me. So I aspired to be like the American pros. I aspired to look at the brands that were the hot American brands. And then, yeah, end of '85, I went to a trade show, and Graham Merry was there with his Hot Wheels set up, and he had the first like black 09 with the black 09 gear and the bag. And because our shop was a good customer of Hot Wheels and I was already racing and I'd already bought frames off of Graham, he basically ordered that kit and the frame in my size and said, "Look, after I've done this trade show, if you like it, I'll do your deal on it and you can have it cheap." So I went along and saw it, and like you, I was like, "Oh my God, this looks so different to anything else, right? Just all black gear with the geometric shapes, and and I got it, and it was, it just blew me away." But yeah, I paid for all that, and then the following year was the Worlds at 86
Yeah.
at Slough in 86, and I'd come fourth in the European Championships. I started sort of doing well at nationals, podium in nationals, and I know at the Worlds at Slough, Graham gave me a new jersey to wear at the Worlds, and it actually said 09 like factory rider and my name on the back. And I was like, well, fucking hell, I've made it now, right? Like
Yeah.
this is the big time. I got a free jersey, but it wasn't the fact it was a free jersey. It was made for me at
Yeah.
the 09 factory with my name on it and factory rider on it, which just, was, as far as I'm concerned, it didn't matter who paid for what or whatever. I had that,
Yeah.
really desirable thing. And when I put that jersey on, I
You
felt
free.
$1 million. I felt special and like blessed and
Yeah.
everything else. And yeah, after that, as you've heard in other podcasts, just stayed riding for Hot Wheels. Then moved over to Revcore when that was getting big. Rode for Revcore for a couple of years. That's when I was sort of got a little bit of budget and didn't pay for bikes anymore. Um, and then it really kind of changed when I started working with GT when GT was distributed by Karate Sport. Because my family was a big GT dealer and they didn't know anything about BMX, they came to me and said, "Look, we're going to get into BMX. Can you help us?" And I said, "Yeah, what do you need?" And that was when Tim Flukes was working at Karate Sport. I'm sure a lot of people listening to your podcast will know Tim Flukes and his many years of amazing service at SRAM and Rock Shops. But Tim was there and he was like, "Look, I don't know anything about BMX. Can you like help out?" And I was like, "Yeah, of course I can." So I put their first BMX orders together and ran the race team for them, and that was a proper team. That was like, tell us what you need, and everybody gets everything they need, and
And
what
what year was that?
expenses.
What year would that have been, Clive?
That was early. That was God. When was that? Early 90s, I think. Probably 93, maybe around that time. And that was when like Dale, Jamie Staff, I mean the team, Keith Dooley, the team was, all the heavy hitters. Um, and that's also when I started getting a mountain bike from them and getting into doing a bit of mountain biking. So and actually I don't think I was, even though I eventually racing BMX long enough became, national champion and everything else. I think that I raced for so long, my national ranking went from like 27 to 24 to 22 to 17 to 14 to 7 to 4 to 1. So it took me maybe 10 years to end up being like a
Still a
national number one. Yeah, but in mountain biking, I don't think we went into mountain biking with the same kind of outlook. I think because I'd already sort of won bike races, I didn't ever feel like I needed to like my goal going into mountain biking was never to like win a race. It was to have fun riding mountain bikes with new friends in different places.
yeah.
And lucky enough in the early years to go and race at Mammoth, riding for Fat Chance and riding for GT, going to events. So yeah, that was really probably a bit of a turning point in my sort of mountain bike trajectory.
Well, I mean, you just mentioned another brand that I aspired to that I never actually got, which was Fat Chance. Um, I, you know, I missed a period of the industry and racing and riding my bike that you just mentioned. Like I stopped racing BMX in '89, and I didn't come back into mountain biking properly. I had a cheap mountain bike that I messed about on, but in the until sort of '96. And I remember going to the bike show, and I went to a couple of events. I ended up getting a GT Zascar, and I remember going to an event, and Dylan was there, maybe Chico, I'm not sure, but all these guys, BMXs that I didn't know super well. Obviously, I knew Dylan really well, but I didn't know Dale that well because, I was not as in the same class as him growing up, and as not in anywhere near as successful as him. And I had just had my own mates from BMX from my region, and my mates that I just hung out with. Like you said, I was never that bothered about. I used to try my hardest, but it wasn't the be all and end all for me to win. I just loved doing it until I got older. And so I missed a period out there, but I remember going to a bike show and seeing you, and probably Paul was there, and Dale and a few other guys, and you guys were all doing some long jump or something, and you had some weird red. Was it? Did you have a Vario bike or something?
Yeah, so you're talking about the bike show at Olympia in probably 95, 96, and that was I used to I sort of loosely knew Dave Hemming, who's
Yeah.
now one of my bestest friends, but I kind of knew Dave a little bit, and then Dave came and worked in Edwards with us for a little while in his early sort of mountain bike career, and I was still BMX racing, and I said to Dave, yeah, I feel like I'm ready for some mountain bike racing. BMX is bit stale. And he's like, "Oh, I'll get you, I'll get you a bike. I'll get you on a team." And it was as casual as that. And Dave was just putting together a team with Mark Pierce from Bromley Bike Evolution Imports. And Mark at that time imported all the cool brands, Yeti, Fat Chance, BLT lights, all the Chris King. He was Chris King distributor forever. And basically they put together this team, uh, which was on Fat Chance. And Dave and I went off and, like I said, did Mammoth and did crazy stuff. And the team was technically sponsored by RockShox. So it was RockShox, Fat Chance, Onza, Shimano, all these really early brands. And
So what
then
did you have then? Was that like a Yo Eddie or something?
it was a Yo Eddie for normal riding, and then a Shockabilly, which was
Oh,
the bike with the AMP back end that everybody had, right?
my
Every
friend still got one of those.
A Shockabilly.
I think so.
Man, what did it have? Like 75 mil of travel on the back, and you'd run it with a, RockShox SL tie fork with a long travel kit that might give you 63 mil or something. I mean, honestly, I when we were out in Mount St. Anne, I was doing the track walk with Win, and I was trying to explain, like, God, when we raced downhill, we had a we had a bike with 75 mil of travel. And it didn't even have V brakes. V brakes hadn't even come out, let alone disc brakes. We had 1.9 or maybe a 2-inch tire. Honestly, I mean, the hardest thing was keeping your chain on. Like people take for granted chain retention
Yeah.
in this day and age, but back then you would have 3 or 4 different chain devices on your bike just to keep your chain on. So
Yeah.
the technology in bikes has come on so much, but that red bike that you're talking about, after the Fat Chance thing ended, Dave and I both rode for a team called Trick Racing. So that was Donald Leahy. So Donald had already done the Saracen team with Warner and Petey, and then after that he did this Trick Racing team. And super weirdly, he got that team going by getting Bart Brenchens on the team, and he was the current Olympic gold medalist, right? So we got Bart Brenchens, and Donald was really good at getting outside industry sponsors. He had Course Beer and the Sun newspaper and Reebok, and he had loads of people putting really big money in. But what Donald was doing with that money was questionable because the team only lasted half a season. So we had Vario bikes, Mazzocchi forks. Jay Hardy was running the team. We That was my first year doing World Cup downhills, and that was that was when Mike King was on GT. I think Nico was still on GT at the time. Francois Gachet was on Sun. Miles Rockwell and Missy were on Volvo Cannondale. It really was like probably the glory years of those early downhill days.
Yeah.
And I think it was just on the cusp of a big technology change as well, because we were sponsored by Shimano. That team was sponsored by Shimano. So it was me, Dave Hemming, Rob Stobar, Kerry Basin, Helen Mortimer. So it was a pretty heavy hitter team. And but yeah, the bikes, like the 4-inch fork was just coming out, like the DHO, the Mazuki Z1, they were just coming out, Mazuki Bomber, and we were like waiting for that stuff. So the World Cups we were going to, which were on tracks like today, they were Nevigale, Patnakosa, all those original sort of downhill tracks. But we had 75 mil forks and V brakes. And
Okay.
Mike King turns up with a DHO with a disc brake. And
Yeah.
you're sitting there and you're like, well, despite the fact that Mike King is 10 times faster than me anyway, I bought a penknife to a I bought a penknife and he's bought a tank. That's how it felt at the time because the technology was like
Yeah.
changing so quick. And when we were doing that Mount St. Anne track walk, like a modern downhill bike is so capable.
Yeah.
As long as you can ride a bike,
Yeah.
the new modern downhill bikes do so much of the work for you. Like you feel like as long as I can hold on and steer it and brake, and the bike is going to do a lot of the work. Back then, the bikes were almost like a hindrance, and the rider had to be so much better.
Yeah.
So yeah, when we were doing that track walk on Mount St. and I said to Win at the top, I was like, man, I think I could ride this. Like it feels like really my sort of track,
Yeah.
fast and smooth. And then we got to the real rocky bits. I was like, nah, I couldn't ride it. I'm done now. But yeah, I was telling him about the old bikes we were riding, and when you have those conversations, modern day riders just glaze over because they can't really understand what a bad mountain bike ever felt like because they've never ridden one.
Yeah. Sure. I mean, and what's your thoughts on, because I often have this conversation with people, but I think it's hard to come up with the right answer because we're older and styles change for young people and stuff, but I still I still think that that era of mid 80s BMX, early to mid 80s BMX, with the American pros that you mentioned, Harry Leary with his Diamondback kit and his Diamondback bike, it all matched. And your 09 kit and 09 bike, I still don't think I've seen any combo that's better than that even to this day, in my eyes and from what I remember. And obviously, nowadays, there's certain teams that you can relate to and see on the hill. But obviously Bruni and Finn on the specialized team, they always look amazing, but sometimes it's hard to visualize who that is coming down the hill because every week they've got a different kit. Um, what's your thoughts on that as for racing? Do you think it's better that they have a different kit and a different colorway every week and a different color bike and stuff, or do you prefer it where there's like one one sort of look for the season?
Well, there's a couple of takeaways from there. For a start, the reason that you and I remember these things so vividly from our childhood is because they were much simpler times. There
Yeah,
was there was three channels on the TV. There was no internet. There was no mobile phones. There was BMX magazines that came out once a month. So the only way that we would find anything out or see anything. So if you think about today, you open your phone, look at Instagram, you're bombarded with visual stimulation, right? It's basically images, images, video, video, whatever. Back then we were starved of it. We didn't have anything to look at. So when I used to go down to the newsagents to get, BMX Action magazine or BMX Action bike, you you would devour it. I would buy that magazine. I would literally go outside the shop, find a bench or sit outside the shop, open it, and sit there for an hour and read it. And you would peel back each page, and it was an exploration and like, oh my God. And you would see all this stuff. And we would over the course of the month of that magazine being out, you would look at it most days and devour every image. So these images are imprinted in our brains, right? So, I'll give you an example. The other day, I had to approve a t-shirt design, and the t-shirt design came through, and I said, "Oh, I love the design, but the rider is wrong. That is Greg Hill, who was a GT rider, but this image is on a GHP." And I thought to myself, how sad that I like remember exactly where that image was. I could probably tell you like what issue of a
Yeah,
magazine it was in. So now, so we are, I think we're fortunate because we have these lasting memories and we have these heroes that we built up. And I think today, like if you think about not just kids, but adults today as well, we're so overly stimulated with all of the stuff that we see. I don't think much of it really sinks in. Like, I
yeah.
don't think the kids will have those images imprinted in their brains that we had because they have constant images. They're bombarded with images from every angle. So I think that that is lucky for us because we have that, and I'm not sure how it kind of I'm not sure how it relates to kids going forward. I'm not sure kids maybe have the same icons or heroes that we had because they're looking at everybody and everybody looks so good,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
So that's a challenge. But I think with some of the changes that Warner Brothers and the UCI are making with maybe riders having career numbers and trying to build the sort of brand of the rider a bit more, maybe that will be
yeah,
beneficial because when you see the rider coming through, like Tani, you
yeah,
know her number.
yeah,
So maybe that will help. But yeah, I think that especially this year where it's been very on trend for brands like Fox and Troy Lee to work with teams to have constantly different kits at the races. I think that's cool because it spices it up a little bit, like all those different kits that the Syndicate have been wearing,
yeah,
and they look really cool. But I do agree that you could be down the bottom of the run looking and thinking, who is that that's coming down? So it's harder to kind of identify with who they are with all the changing stuff. But you've got to keep it changing because you've got to keep the content fresh, right?
oh yeah, definitely.
Got
I
to
mean,
feed the machine. Got to feed the machine.
yeah, yeah, and obviously, like big brands like Fox, they're bringing out that kit all the time, and then people are wanting to buy that kit, so they're always keeping fresh stuff to sell.
Exactly.
Definitely. And so, obviously we touched on it earlier a little bit, but there's going to be some changes with the downhill moving forward. And you mentioned that there might be some, other race series that could benefit from that. My concern was those secondary, not secondary, but those other race series that might feed into the World Cup in the future. I was just, worried that there wouldn't be the sponsorship for those series because all the big brands would be putting the money into having the elite race teams because they're going to get the exposure. Unfortunately, the Tweed Valley had a great enduro race series. Tweed Love, they've packed it in this year just to because there's no sponsorship money coming in. If you've got no sponsorship money, you can't have decent prize money to attract the top riders in the country, to come. I think that's a big thing that needs to come back, to at your national level races. You want to have your best riders in your country for the younger kids to look up to and to try and emulate, like like we did when I first started racing. If Rob Warner and Steve Pete and whoever else was at the event, then that made me excited, and I wanted to try and do my best to get as close to them guys as possible. Whereas if you go into a national round and the top riders in your country are not there, it's just a bit of it's like
Mm.
not a national event anymore. It's more of a regional event. So
Well, yeah, before Mount St. Anne, I went over for the US Open, which is obviously part of that Monster Series.
Yeah,
And I was really impressed with that. It was a really well run event.
yeah,
Clay that runs that series is a super hard working, nice guy. Clay and Mike that run those events. And obviously they've got some big brands on board with Fox and Monster. And I think that because of what's happening at the World Cup level, basically they're I do agree with I know that, there's a lot of divisive opinions about it, but if you listen to that podcast that Josh Bryson did with MBUK recently, he talks about how hardline and how good thing about hardline is because it's a smaller number of riders. Like when you come down for your run, the track's not all blown out because there's been 160 riders go down and breaking and changing the track quite dramatically because that's what happens at World Cup. You go down and the track could be quite different based on the volume of riders that have gone through. So I do think that less riders could be beneficial. I do think that if there's less riders, naturally the riders that aren't on the elite team or can't race World Cups will hopefully go and race more of the sort of regional series, I'd probably call it, because IXS is sort of like a European regional series. The Monster series is the US kind of series. And I do think that they will be bolstered because there'll be riders that are going to go to those races that maybe would normally be on a World Cup team and be at World Cup races.
yeah,
So I think it could be good for the sport because, if you go to a more regional race and you see these bigger names there that would normally be at World Cups, I think that is aspirational for more kids. And I think you're right with the UK downhill series. There's some incredible riders there, and a lot of the top, uh, elite men. Matt Walker and those guys go to nationals. But I definitely feel like we need more strong regional and national races will end up getting, ultimately strong World Cup look and feel in the future.
yeah. And I think, for me to attract those, the UK just alone has got some amazing World Cup athletes. You mentioned Matt Walker. We've mentioned Danny, there's Laurie Greenland, there's endless, really, Ethan, there's so many good World Cup UK downhillers, but to get them to go and do all the national series, which, takes away from their focus and training on the World Cups, there needs to be good prize money to make them worthwhile. Because, some of these guys, some years they earn really good money, other years they don't. It's not like they're earning footballers kind of wages. So for them to, do the extra risk and the extra, work to go and compete in the national series, it needs to be worthwhile to them as well, doesn't it? So, I hope that the industry, if they're not
Mhm.
spending money on a World Cup race team, they will start, putting a bit of support into those national events, which, I think will help the brands in the UK for sure.
I mean, I can't speak for other brands, but obviously say for example, in the UK with GT, we're very much into junior development. So we help out the trail rippers. Those kids are insane. Andy at Virus with the Virus GT development team. It's important to race World Cup, sorry, to race regional races and national races because if you haven't got that strong feeder team coming through, like I said, you haven't got the superstars in the future, but also other events like Malverns and Hard Rock, they just sort of get people, into
Sport.
riding, yeah, or also maybe racing. Like my daughter races mountain bikes at the Malverns. It's the only time she really races mountain bikes because her thing is football. But the fact that Malverns exists and these other events exist and kids can go along and race mountain bikes or bikes in general, I think is just great because it keeps them engaged with cycling. But I also think that there needs to be more outside industry sponsors that should come in and everybody wants to have a green look and feel to their brand, and I know that there's blatant greenwashing, but also some brands actually look at cycling and go, wow, that's actually a way to to market to a particular audience that's interesting to us, or to give our brand a particularly good look because we're supporting something that's green and sustainable. Um, so I do, and I think maybe that's the problem, is the bike industry doesn't look enough outside of its own front door
Yeah.
for support and sponsorship. So, it's not going to be brands like GT that support all this stuff. It's got to be the, PCGs and the whoever brands come in and recognize that it's a good strategy to be involved in cycling.
Definitely, yeah. I've always wondered, why. Obviously, back in the day, GT was sponsored by Chevy trucks, and we mentioned the Volvo Cannondale. With mountain biking in general, and especially events like Hard Rock and the Malverns that are like festivals, and it brings the people that aren't following, maybe not even following the World Cup type of racing, but so many of those people have a VW transporter camper van with a pop top on, or a whatever brand. It's a shame that we don't see VW California, for instance. You see so many of those vans at a big mountain bike event, and they're what, flipping 70, 80 grand or something to buy one
Mm.
of those. It should be those brands that are sponsoring those type of events, I think, and that, because it all ties in with what, the customers that they're dealing with with who are riding the mountain bikes.
Yeah. Yeah, you got to remember with events like again, let's talk about Malvern's because it's an event that sort of close to me being in sort of helping Si get it going in the last couple of years again. The reach of that isn't the 8,000 people that Si gets in the field. It's the 10 stories on Pink Bike and
Yeah,
over the same sort of week as normally World Champs or World Cup. So actually the reach is the global mountain bike community. So if you're at an event like Malvern's or Hard Rock and you're getting all those stories on, some of the biggest mountain bike websites in the world, Pink Bike Vital, Lone Wolf, whatever, you're getting eyeballs on your brand across the whole global mountain bike community. So I do think that more sort of non-endemic, non-bike industry brands could really benefit by getting involved with some of these events.
yeah,
And actually, I have sort of, having been the sort of sponsor of the Malvern since I brought it back, we are in 2025 kind of stepping back from being the title sponsor, mainly to give Si the opportunity to get somebody else in that could bring that to it. Because also, if you bring a new brand in that's not a bike industry brand, they can then bring the people that follow that brand into mountain biking as a sport or cycling as a sport.
yeah,
So yeah, I'm hoping that I can bring somebody in that again maybe a car brand or a brand that wants that sort of sustainability angle that can benefit from having access to the global mountain bike community.
yeah, definitely, mate, definitely. Cool. Well, we're coming up to nearly 2 hours now, so I imagine a few people will start thinking, are these boys going to stop talking shortly? But obviously we've been in it for so long and done diverse, roles and stuff. We could carry on, and hopefully we'll do another one at another time. See how the World Cup has progressed. See what other events are popping up and how the GT brands going. I'm really pleased for you to get that role. That's an amazing role that you deserve. And
Thank you.
cool, cool. All right. Well, thank you so much for your time this morning. I know you're a busy fella. And it's always good to see you and chat to you. We chat quite often, and yeah, it's always a good time. And yeah, like I say, thanks for the good influencing times that you gave to me in my youth. It was a big part of my BMX childhood and enjoyment.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. And it's it's weird to hear that sort of stuff that when you were 16, somebody else looked up to you and liked what you had and thought you were cool and maybe wanted what you had because of that. I think I mean, it's still the same today, right? We see stuff and we aspire to it. But if I had any impact on you or anybody else, I do feel very privileged to have been in that position. But also the main thing is after all these years, both of us still kind of being in the bike industry for this long, two pretty simple guys from pretty simple backgrounds who just got into riding bikes and we managed to sort of make a living out of it. I think that's possibly a key takeaway for maybe some younger people listening is that if you have a passion for something, pursue it. And if you love something and you love doing it, you can make a living out of it. And eventually you'll end up with jobs like we've had, where you were running some of the best mountain bike teams and some of the best athletes in the world. And I'm all of a sudden in charge with the look and feel of one of the most iconic brands in the bike industry. So, hey, I think we've both done well, right?
Yeah, we have, and like you say, yeah, I mean, some young kids think, "Oh, I've got to be the best in the world and win every race." You don't. As long as you're a good person, make good contacts, and love what you're doing, like you said, there's plenty of opportunities out there.
Well, do you know what? I'll leave you with one final thought. And somebody said to me a very long time ago, I can't remember the context of it, but somebody said to me, life's not a popularity contest. And I think maybe I was trying to be nice to somebody to get something done. But I think it is. I think if you're a nice person and people like dealing with you, and you are approachable and you're cooperative and you're communicative, I think that really will get you far in life. So I do think that people like people, we're human beings, we're social creatures. I think if you're a pretty good person and you don't mess people around and you're a man of your word and or a person of your word in this day and age, I think that really goes far in life. So yeah, I would say, to people out there, just that'd be my key takeaway. Don't be a dick.
Yeah, definitely.
All
Yeah.
right,
Cool.
PG.
All
Thanks
right.
for
Well,
your time.
yeah, thanks, Clive, and I'll speak to you soon.
Take care. Keep up the good work.
Cheers, and you.
Thank you.
Bye. Cool. You can sign off now, and I'll do an outro thing, and then I'll catch up with you soon.
Sounds good. Take care, mate. See you
Oh,
soon.
sorry, one thing. When you get a minute, would you email through some career photos for Maya to use for the Instagram?
Yeah. Yeah, yeah, sure.
Well, there's a
Um,
09 picture in there.
all right. I'll have a look and see what I can find. I'll go there's probably, I mean, she's not going to be on Facebook, but there's quite a lot of pictures on the Facebook. But I'll send something over on the email address that you sent the invite on.
Okay, just a few different things from the whole era of when you was a kid up until now. That'd be
All
great.
right. All right. I'll see what I can find. All right,
Thanks.
mate.
See ya.
Cheers. See you
Bye.
later.
Bye. Well, I hope you all enjoyed that interview with Clive. I thought it was really interesting and, another person in the industry from another angle. So, yeah, hope you enjoyed it. And please like, subscribe. If you feeling generous, please go on to our buy us a coffee, and that really helps with the us keeping going with the podcast. And yeah, hopefully I can get somebody else interesting on for you all to listen to next week. But have a good week and weekend, and we'll see you soon. Cheers.